The Pit and the Pendulum by Edgar Allan Poe. I was sick, sick unto death with that long agony, and when they at length unbound me, and I was permitted to sit, I felt that my senses were leaving me. The sentence, the dread sentence of death, was the last of distinct accentuation which reached my ears. After that, the sound of the inquisitorial voices seemed merged in one dreamy, indeterminate hum. It conveyed to my soul the idea of revolution, perhaps from its association in fancy with the burr of a mill wheel, this only for a brief period, for presently I heard no more. Yet for a while I saw, but with how terrible an exaggeration. I saw the lips of the black-robed judges. They appeared to me whiter than the sheet upon which I traced these words, and thin even to grotesqueness, thin with the intensity of their expression of firmness, of immovable resolution, of stern contempt of human torture. I saw that the decrees of what to me was fate were still issuing from those lips. I saw them writhe with a deadly locution. I saw them fashion the syllables of my name, and I shuddered because no sound succeeded. I saw, too, for a few moments of delirious horror, the soft and nearly imperceptible waving of the sable draperies which enwrapped the walls of the apartment, and then my vision fell upon the 7 tall candles upon the table. At first they wore the aspect of charity, and seemed white slender angels who would save me, but then all at once there came a most deadly nausea over my spirit, and I felt every fibre in my frame thrill as if I had touched the wire of a galvanic battery, while the angel forms became meaningless, spectres with heads of flame, and I saw that from them there would be no help. And then there stole into my fancy, like a rich musical note, the thought of what sweet rest there must be in the grave. The thought came gently and stealthily, and it seemed long before it attained full appreciation. But just as my spirit came at length properly to feel and entertain it, the figures of the judges vanished, as if magically, from before me. The tall candles sank into nothingness, their flames went out utterly. The blackness of darkness supervened, all sensations appeared swallowed up in a mad rushing descent, as of the soul, into Hades. Then silence and stillness, night were the universe. I had swooned, but still will not say that all of consciousness was lost. What of it there remained I will not attempt to define, or even to describe here. Yet all was not lost. In the deepest slumber, no. In delirium, no. In a swoon, no. In death, no. Even in the grave all is not lost. Else there is no immortality for man. Arousing from the most profound of slumbers, we break the gossamer web of some dream, yet in a second afterward, so frail may that web have been, we remember not that we have dreamed. In the return to life from the swoon there are 2 stages. First, that of the sense of mental or spiritual. Secondly, that of the sense of physical existence. It seems probable that if, upon reaching the second stage, we could recall the impressions of the first, we should find these impressions eloquent in memories of the gulf beyond. And that gulf is what? How at least shall we distinguish its shadows from those of the tomb? But if the impressions of what I have termed the first stage are not at will recalled, yet after long interval, do they not come unbidden, while we marvel whence they come? He who has never swooned is not he who finds strange palaces and wildly familiar faces in coals that glow. He who has never swooned is not he who beholds floating in mid-air the sad visions that the many may not view. He who has never swooned is not he who ponders over the perfume of some novel flower. He is not he who hears the note of some strange melody which has never before arrested his attention. Amid frequent and thoughtful endeavors to remember, amid earnest struggles to regather some token of the state of seeming nothingness into which my soul had lapsed, there have been moments when I have dreamed of success. There have been brief, very brief periods when I have conjured up remembrances which the lucid reason of a later epoch assures me could have had reference only to that condition of seeming unconsciousness. These shadows of memory tell indistinctly of tall figures that lifted and bore me in silence down, still down, till a hideous dizziness oppressed me at the mere ideas of the interminableness of the descent. They tell also of a vague horror at my heart on account of that heart's unnatural stillness. Then comes a sense of sudden motionlessness throughout all things, as if those who bore me, a group of tall figures, had outrun in their descent the limits of the limitless, and paused from the wearisomeness of their toil. After this I call to mind flatness and dampness, and then all is madness, the madness of a memory which busies itself among forbidden things. So far I had not opened my eyes. I felt that I lay upon my back unbound. I reached out my hand, and it fell heavily upon something damp and hard. I struggled to draw it back, but it was in vain. The surface had caught it firmly. I exerted all my strength to free it. The attempt was successful. With great effort I opened my eyes. My worst thoughts then were confirmed. The blackness of eternal night encompassed me. I struggled to breathe. The intensity of the darkness seemed to oppress and stifle me. The atmosphere was intolerably close. I still lay quietly and made effort to exercise my reason. I brought to mind the inquisitorial proceedings and attempted from that point to deduce my real condition. The sentence had been passed, and it appeared to me that a very long interval of time had since elapsed. Yet not for a moment did I suppose myself actually dead. Such a supposition, notwithstanding what we read in fiction, is altogether inconsistent with real existence. But where and in what state was I? The condemned to death, I knew, perished usually at the auto da fe, and one of these had been held on the very night of the day of my trial. Had I been remanded to my dungeon to await the next sacrifice, which would not take place for many months? This, I at once saw, could not be. Victims had been in immediate demand. Moreover, my dungeon, as well as all the condemned cells at Toledo, had stone floors, and light was not altogether excluded. A fearful idea now suddenly drove the blood in torrents upon my heart, and for a brief period I once more relapsed into insensibility. Upon recovering, I at once started to my feet, trembling convulsively in every fiber. I thrust my arms wildly above and around me in all directions. I felt nothing, yet dreaded to move a step lest I should be impeded by the walls of a tomb. Perspiration burst from every pore and stood in cold big beads upon my forehead. The agony of suspense grew, at length, intolerable, and I cautiously moved forward with my arms extended and my eyes straining from their sockets in the hope of catching some faint ray of light. I proceeded for many paces, but still all was blackness and vacancy. I breathed more freely. It seemed evident that mine was not at least the most hideous of fates. And now, as I still continued to step cautiously onward, there came thronging upon my recollection 1,000 vague rumors of the horrors of Toledo. Of the dungeons there had been strange things narrated. Fables, I had always deemed them, but yet strange and too ghastly to repeat save in a whisper. Was I left to perish of starvation in this subterranean world of darkness? Or what fate, perhaps even more fearful, awaited me? That the result would be death, and a death of more than customary bitterness, I knew too well the character of my judges to doubt. The mode and the hour were all that occupied or distracted me. My outstretched hands at length encountered some solid obstruction. It was a wall, seemingly of stone masonry, very smooth, slimy, and cold. I followed it up, stepping with all the careful distrust with which certain antique narratives had inspired me. This process, however slow, gave me an inestimable feeling of security. For the moment it seemed an evidence that I had at least not fallen into the pit, and I made bold to advance, still cautiously, along the surface. The wall was irregular. I counted its several angles and thus deduced the shape of the enclosure. In some places they stood out as sharp angles, while in others they retreated. At length, with a sudden step, my foot slipped. The fabric of the prison trembled under my touch. I fell violently on my face. In the confusion attending my fall, I did not immediately apprehend a certain circumstance which afterward startled me. It was this. My chin rested upon the floor of the prison, but my lips and the upper portion of my head touched nothing. At the same time, my forehead seemed bathed in a clammy vapor, and the peculiar smell of decayed fungus arose to my nostrils. I put forward my arm, and shuddered to find that I had fallen at the very brink of a circular pit, whose extent, of course, I had no means of ascertaining at the moment. Groping about the masonry just below the margin, I succeeded in dislodging a small fragment and let it fall into the abyss. For many seconds I hearkened to its reverberations as it dashed against the sides of the chasm in its descent. At length there was a sullen plunge into water, followed by loud echoes. At the same moment there came a sound resembling the quick opening and closing of a door overhead, while a faint gleam of light flashed suddenly through the gloom, and as suddenly faded into darkness again. I understood the full horror of my fate. In the inquisitorial executions there had been various kinds of secret dungeons, and I had fallen into one of the most dreaded. The condemned were sometimes permitted to die of hunger, sometimes hurriedly destroyed by more sudden means. Sometimes the floor would open and a gulf would yawn, into which the prisoner was precipitated, and the sudden closing of the aperture would leave no trace. The torture of suspense grew intolerable. I resolved to know my doom, and without hesitation I extended my arms and once more groped my way around the dungeon. I went on for many steps until my head struck sharply against something solid. It was a wall, apparently of stone masonry, very smooth, slimy, and cold. I followed it, stepping with all the careful distrust with which certain antique narratives had inspired me. This slow process gave me an inestimable feeling of security. For the moment at least I had not fallen into the pit. Still cautiously, I made the circuit of my prison. I counted its circuit and found that it was about 100 paces. I had counted 54 when I tripped and fell violently upon my face. In the confusion attending my fall, I did not immediately apprehend a certain circumstance which afterwards startled me. It was this. My chin rested upon the floor of the prison, but my lips and the upper portion of my head touched nothing. At the same time, my forehead seemed bathed in a clammy vapor, and the peculiar smell of decayed fungus arose to my nostrils. I put forward my arm, and shuddered to find that I had fallen at the very brink of a circular pit. Groping about the masonry just below the margin, I succeeded in dislodging a small fragment, and let it fall into the abyss. For many seconds I listened to its reverberations as it dashed against the sides of the chasm in its descent. At length there was a sullen plunge into water, followed by echoes. At the same moment there came a sound resembling the quick opening and closing of a door overhead, while a faint gleam of light flashed suddenly through the gloom, and as suddenly faded into darkness again. It now occurred to me that I had been deceived in my measurement of the circuit of the prison. I resolved to attempt it again, but this time more carefully. The attempt proved fruitless. I had either miscalculated before, or had been misled by some irregularity in the wall. My conclusions, however, were not materially different. The dungeon I now knew was circular, and about 50 yards in diameter. I discovered, too, that there were at least 2 pits within its circuit, and that my doom was to be one of the most hideous of all. In vain I tried to calm my mind and to hope. My captors, I felt, had not intended that I should perish by falling into the pit. They were too ingenious for that. Having failed in their first attempt, they would devise something more certain, more hideous, more refined. Shaking in every nerve, I awaited the result. At length there stole into my senses a strong odor of heated iron. It pervaded the dungeon. A suffocating vapor filled the air. A dull glow stole along the iron walls and crept slowly up from the floor. I saw the outlines of figures upon the walls, monstrous and hideous, demonic and mocking. They glared upon me with fiery eyes, and 1,000 flames seemed to pour forth from their mouths. The walls themselves became intensely heated and were closing in upon me. I shrank back, but the walls pressed me onward, step by step, toward the brink of the pit. Already I tottered upon its edge, when suddenly there came a loud clangor, as of many voices, a sound of human trumpets, and a harsh grating as of 1,000 thunders. The fiery walls rushed back. A strong arm caught me as I fell. It was that of General Lasalle. The French army had entered Toledo. The Inquisition was in the hands of its enemies.
Thanks for watching. Please like and comment if you enjoyed, and consider subscribing if you think I deserve it. I'll catch y'all in the next one.